Well, hello. Welcome to Yoga Talks Podcast. My name is Jay Brown, and it's good to be talking to you. I got to admit it. I've been looking forward to it, and here I am. I got this mic, got a little red light, and, last month I had fun. I asked for some feedback. I did a little bit more talking, not just the interview, and I got some feedback. What's interesting is that I asked for feedback about two specific things. I asked for feedback about me talking about my wife and is it indulgent for me to just talk about myself and personal stuff and do kind of a monologue kind of thing, or should it just be the talks, And I did get some feedback about that, and I got some really lovely emails, and I'm really appreciative. I want to give a particular shout out to one friend whose name's not in my mind right now. I'm sorry, but she's from Australia, and she basically was, listening to the podcast and paused it after the intro and emailed me. Her one daughter was at school and her other little daughter was toddling around on the floor at her feet, and she just felt her and her husband were going through some similar things. And she just wanted me to know that, I don't know, it made her smile and it made her feel a little bit better about the situation and feel human. And that's it. I love that. And that's what it makes me happy. And that's why I'm doing it. And I'll do a little bit more going forward because of that, because I think that there's something to me revealing something of myself on this podcast. And I want to say more about that later. But in any case, the other thing that I asked for feedback about, which I didn't get that much feedback about, and I'm not surprised, is I asked about yoga lines. What should we do about yoga lines? Does anybody have any ideas about yoga lines? And, most of the times just yoga lines sucks. And, or a couple of people tried to say something instructive. But the reality is, and I always forget this, because I've written about yoga lines maybe 3 times now, and they get read. I can see stats of how many times it gets read, and they get read. I think people think it's an important thing, but no one has anything to say about it. It's like politics or something. And at a certain point, when it's just this, entrenched situation that no one has a really good answer for, you kind of shut down at a certain point. It's you don't know what to say about it. And that's what I felt, and I was trying to express that. And I think that's where a lot of people are at. I do have one thing to report, because Andrew Tanner, the spokesman for Yoga Lines, he listened to the podcast. And he reached out to me, and he was actually in town, and we went and hung out and spent an hour or two having a cup of tea, and we had a good conversation. And he's going to come on the podcast, and I don't just want to talk to him about yoga lines, because he's got a whole story to tell. I learned all this stuff about him. He's a really interesting guy. And I spoke to him off the record. He wanted to tell me some things, and he wanted to make sure that they didn't go public. And I appreciate that, and they will remain off the record. I do feel I want to say something, though, because in the last podcast, I think I painted a picture. I painted a picture that, Richard was this great guy. He did this fantastic job. And I do think he did a good job from my standpoint. But that there was some nefarious, maybe something that he got, dumped. And there's some people there. And what are they doing there? And I kind of painted a picture of the yoga lines. And frankly, there's more to the story, and there's reasons why it's not public, and I just think that's right. Sometimes there's some things that shouldn't be public, and so it's a lesson for me. It's a lesson for me, and we should learn from it. I don't know. There's always more to the story most of the time, and so for whatever that's worth, I'm going to get Andrew on. We're going to talk some about the yoga lines more, but for whatever that's worth. Now, the last thing that's really interesting to me about the feedback I got, which is that I got a lot of feedback about a third thing that I didn't ask for feedback about, which was basically my podcasting abilities. some people thought that I did not a good job, that I basically was talking over him and interrupting him, and they found that very annoying. In fact, some people went so far as to say that it was painful and I should have not released the episode. It was that bad. And I got to be honest, like when I had listened to the episode before we posted it, I didn't really hear that. And, you know, if I listen back to the first two episodes, I mean, I'm talking over people there too. In fact, we do it a lot. Me and Josh like all over each other. But, you know, when I listened back after everybody sort of said, hey, man, why are you talking over him? I did hear it. And I agree, you know, like I definitely, you know, need to learn to listen better, and I concede that. I mean, I think there was other factors. It was the second one I'd ever done, and I was nervous, and you know, there's all kinds of stuff. I'm not trying to make excuses for myself, but you know, I thought a lot about it, and my wife's like gets all defensive for me, you know, and for me, I'm like I'm okay with it. Like these podcasts are gonna have me however I am on the day that we record them. And, you know, like maybe there's a little bit of editing and we do that to just make it like a, you know, like a more enjoyable episode, but like basically not. Like I didn't edit anything with the previous episodes, you know. It's not like we like try to like move things around or anything. I don't know if you could do that, but I like that I'm going to grow, you know, I'm going to learn, and I want to get better at it. And, you know, part of it for me, it's something that I do just as a person in general. And I think sometimes I'm not listening and not paying good attention, but sometimes I'm just really excited by the conversation that's happening. Another thing that I noticed, which is really interesting, that I didn't even really notice about myself until I started doing these podcasts, is that I'm like dyslexic some, and I have this thing I'll do where I will repeat what someone just said in my own words right after they said it. And it's sort of like totally redundant. It's like, they just said that. Why did you just repeat it with slightly different words? And it's basically me like registering in my brain what they just said. And, you know, I can do it in my own head. I don't have to say it out loud, I don't think. But I'm going to work on it. In any case, I can say for anybody who's listening to this who was annoyed by me interrupting, I got the note. And you know, in today's episode, I don't interrupt like that. I'm pretty sure it was a different kind of conversation with Ryan Cunningham, and you know, I definitely there is another episode next month. I'm just giving you a little bit of warning. That was recorded before I got the feedback. It's a little bit out of order. It's next month, but I definitely do some more of that. But I'm gonna work on it. And here's the thing. Here's the main thing, which is I've just decided that I want the podcast not to be like fine-tuned polish. Like it's not like that thing where you paint the best possible picture of yourself on Facebook and everybody thinks your life is great, but when in actuality, like at home, everything's horrible. You know, I like the idea is to not, it's not sound bites. It's not clickbait. It's really me. This is really me talking into a microphone. I'm not going to censor it. I'm not going to like try to make it a perfect picture of myself. So that just means that you're going to see my flaws, and I'm going to see my flaws, and I'm going to have to be okay with that. And I'm hoping that's going to help me grow. And I'm hoping that that's a model for how we can grow in general. I guess, I don't know. So that's that. That's what I wanted to say about that, about the feedback that I got from you guys. And it's fun. And please feel free to do it more. Please be nice to me, you know. I don't have any radio experiences, new, and I'm exploring it, and I'm appreciating that you guys are doing it with me and giving me an opportunity to do it more. So with that, I have a really cool conversation to share with you with a guy named Ryan Cunningham. I don't want to give too much away. We do talk for quite a bit, but you know, basically I went to do these workshops in Boston, and Ryan was the manager at the yoga center that invited me to come. And, you know, I was excited about that gig because it's, you know, I get these opportunities to go to some centers that are a little bit more established where people, you know, have been going there to do these kind of gigs for years. I can become like a regular gig. That's a cool thing, you know? But 3 days before I go, I call him to touch base with him and say, hey, I'm coming. I'm looking forward to it. Is there anything I need to know? Whatever. And he says, no, everything's great. But hey, I should mention 3 days ago, the yoga center got sold to YogaWorks. And so your check's going to say YogaWorks on it. I was like, whoa. So basically, I sort of emailed him and I said, wow, would you be interested in recording a podcast with me? That's such an interesting thing to have happen right before I show up. And he said, yeah, I'm game. Sure, you know. And I was staying with him. I was sleeping on his couch. And so basically what this conversation is I arrived at his place. I walk in the door. I say, hey, man, I shake his hand. Nice to meet you. And we're going to go sit down on the couch and just like hang out for a while before we go have dinner. And we're just going to have like that talk that you would have with someone the first time you meet them. And I said, well, hey, should we just record right now? Can we just do the podcast right now? He said, sure. So this is the first conversation I've ever had with Ryan. We've just had like a couple of emails. But it turns out like Ryan, he's a really interesting example, you know, of an independent yoga teacher. And what it's taken, he's got, he's 10 years behind me. So it was a little bit different for him than it was for me. But he knows he came up as a teacher. He managed the center, and he runs teacher trainings. We talk a lot about teacher training and stuff. So it's a pretty interesting conversation about a lot of different things that are going on in the yoga world and some personal stuff, you know, about what it is, I think, to, you know, be a teacher. So cool. Let's listen to Ryan and, yeah, enjoy. Well, Ryan, it's awesome to meet you, man.
It's great to meet you too.
I mean, this is kind of a cool thing, you know. I've only done a few of these podcasts, and this is the first time I'm doing one with someone that I've never met before.
Cool. Well, I feel like I know you a little bit just from your blogs and stuff. So it's great to finally meet you and you know, get to hang out.
Yeah, cool. Well, I'm here at your place, and we are in, I guess it's BackBay, Boston. Is that right?
Yeah.
And I'm here to teach a couple of workshops this weekend, and you're the reason I'm here.
Yes.
Yeah, you contacted me. Do we have any mutual friends, or what made you contact me? I'm curious about that. I don't even know.
I mean, apart from hanging out with Leslie Kamenoff a lot.
I see. So you knew Leslie, and you knew Leslie and I were friends. So
yeah. So
I see you were aware of me there.
Exactly.
Cool. And you currently, at least for the short-term moment,
yes,
are the manager at BackBay Yoga. Is that right?
That's correct.
And I know they have 2 locations. Do you just do this one location? Do you both locations?
Mostly it's just the one location.
I see.
But, you know, something breaks over there. And
sometimes
I got to run over to the other side of town.
I see. And how long have you been at BackBay doing the managerial stuff?
I probably started there like 6 years ago almost, and started as a teacher and then sort of started managing kind of haphazardly from there.
I see. Well, I know sometimes like when you start teaching at a place and you get invested there, you want to contribute more to it.
Absolutely. Yeah.
You know how the place is run, and
yeah.
And there's an education to that, right?
Absolutely.
You know how a yoga center runs.
Yeah, exactly. For better or for worse.
Yes. Well, it's good knowledge. If you ever want to run a yoga center, you know exactly what goes into it.
Exactly.
And so I guess we should mention it, but I don't want to totally go there yet. Like you notified me like when I touched base with you a few days ago before coming that the center has been sold to YogaWorks.
That's correct.
Wow. And did you know that was coming, or was it sudden to you as well?
I had my suspicions, but the speed with which it happened was a surprise for sure.
I think. Well, I want to backtrack first.
Okay.
I that was a teaser. That was a
Sure.
teaser because that is an interesting thread that is about us this weekend. But I want to backtrack a little bit from there. Like you said, how long have you been at BackBay again?
For about 6 years.
And so you started teaching there 6 years ago. Did you do training there, or how did you come to BackBay?
So I came to Boston for grad school to go to New England Conservatory.
Okay, and just what were you studying there?
Jazz composition. I was getting my master's.
What's your instrument?
Saxophone.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
I'm
So
a bass player.
Oh, cool.
But not to that level. Like I'm a very hacky, like punk rock, self-taught
Hey, that
bass
works.
player.
Yeah.
But I always imagined that if I ever played another instrument, I always thought saxophone would be it. So I'm envious of you. But you were studying music, and how'd you get into yoga?
So when I was in undergrad, I got pretty bad tendonitis. I don't really know if it was tendonitis. My arms just sort of ceased to function. Actually, I remember one day playing and taking a break, coming back, and I actually couldn't wrap my hands around the flute anymore. It was like,
Wow, and
it just
they didn't know
stopped.
They didn't know what that was or why that was
They
happening?
called it tendonitis. I think it was probably more something more like a thoracic outlet syndrome, something like that. Because
I have a musician I work with right now who was a guitar player and had to stop playing for a long time.
Yeah.
He plays a little bit now, but crazy how that stuff can happen. So that derailed stuff, didn't it?
absolutely.
And how long had you been studying music before that?
Since I was like 10.
Wow.
Yeah.
So that must have been really...
It was a rough.
That must
it
be
was a
really
rough
rough.
blow.
Because your whole direction was
Yeah.
to do that, and then
Absolutely.
you couldn't play.
And then, so I had to stop playing for like 3 months, like full stop.
Yeah.
And then luckily that was sort of right at the summer, so I actually could take 3 months in between.
Oh, so it didn't mess up.
It didn't mess up anything too much. And then I started seeing a rolfer, and at some point couldn't afford to keep going to get body work every week.
Yeah, that's pricey.
And then he was like, well, you should do yoga. And I had done a little bit of yoga here and there.
But was the raw thing like helping? Was it?
Oh yeah,
like,
it was totally.
Like you could wrap your hand around the sax again, or
after
what?
the first session, I could feel like, oh, that's how my arm's supposed to function, and it felt like he was actually going in and like separating each and every tendon, like that. That's what it felt like. It was one of the most painful experiences that I've ever gone through. But as soon as after the first session, I was like, oh, this is working. This is needed. Yeah. So I told him that I just couldn't afford it anymore.
Yeah,
and
I'm just a college kid.
Yeah. And he was like, well, you should do yoga. And I had done yoga before, but knew it basically as a lot of push-ups and downward facing dog. And that wasn't really
what you needed for
in
your
the cards. So he actually sent me to Bikram because it was the only thing he could think of where there's no weight bearing.
Oh, right. That's what they say sometimes because there's no weight bearing.
Yeah.
But that's a whole other issue.
Exactly. That's
a whole bunch of other stuff going on there.
But actually, I think, I went the place I went because I had free time during the day. It was like there was nobody it was like 6 of us that would take class. It was the owner of the studio. It was not nearly as hot as it was supposed to be. Like I could tell it wasn't like
within any tradition, there's always teachers who kind of don't always go exactly to
totally. And there was something about like things I remember like just the act of like pushing my foot into my hand, like that like stretch of the arm just being like feeling so amazing every time I would do it. Like there are things about that practice that I remember being so wonderful at the time.
Well, I imagine like that thing that was happening with your arm and your playing was a repetitive stress thing.
Yeah.
So you were just like holding your arm in a certain way, playing that
Exactly.
saxophone without a whole lot of consciousness about what's going on in your
Totally.
body for hours and hours and hours and hours on end. And finally your body was like, hell no, you're not going to do that anymore.
Exactly. And then nope, we're cutting you off.
And then so you free up some new movement patterns for yourself.
Exactly.
Interesting.
And then I was able to continue as a performance major through still doing yoga. I did transition away from Bikram pretty fast because the heat was even though it was
suit you.
less than what probably was is the norm, it was still a little much for me.
You discovered that there were other options.
Yes, I did discover there were other options, and most of that was in the form of, vinyasa teachers who had enough sense to show me other ways of doing things. It wasn't that the class they were teaching was really appropriate for me either, but for whatever reason, I felt comfortable going in. And
so somebody gave you personal attention,
exactly.
even though it was like a regular old group vinyasa class.
Exactly. And I remember...
They're like, oh, you got an issue, let me help you out.
Exactly. And, well, why don't you go do this instead? Why don't...
Gave you options.
Gave me some things that I could...
and that was happening before you got to BackBay.
Yeah, this was all happening in Chicago.
This is all happening in Chicago.
Yeah. So
you...
After I got done...
You finished school.
With school, I moved back to Cleveland for a year. And Cindy Lee and her teachers were traveling in to do a teacher training at the studio in Cleveland.
I see.
And so I did the training.
Yes, I just talked with Elena Brower. She did training. I taught at the Center for a while too.
And then went... Then while I was going through that training, I got into grad school and moved here. And
were you still playing music when you did yoga teacher training?
Yes, I was still playing music. I was still
like in bands,
writing, and because I took a year off because I wanted to do composition, because I did realize that I couldn't, even though I was way like I could play again, I couldn't. Like, even now when I play, I'll get reminders that, like, hey...
Not that long.
No, you got to stop that. That's too aggressive. Like, you know. So my arms will still... There'll be, like, a little bit of an electronic, response in my hand. And I'll be like, okay. I'm just going to... And I don't think it's so much about... Because I'm not playing for any, super long period of time. But it's more I get into the sort of old habits of just...
The way you're hitting it, yeah. What kind of music do you compose or like to play?
So it's still mostly jazz. I mean, that's what I always studied and always played. So, but when I went to grad school, I did have it in my head that I wasn't going to grad school to be a professional jazz composer. Like, I just wanted to go, and I wouldn't have gone had I not gotten into NEC. Like, I hadn't gotten in a lot of places and was sort of like, well, okay, well, maybe it's gonna, and then this big envelope arrived and I was like, okay. Well, I've got to go now.
Yeah, I guess I'm going to go be a jazz musician or a jazz composer.
So, but right when I moved here, I already started teaching in Cleveland. So right when I moved here, I got a bunch of classes and was teaching.
So yoga was happening alongside the whole time.
Absolutely. And I was teaching almost from the start when I moved to Boston. Not at BackBay right away, but at just studios around the area.
And what was it like back then? Can you remember what year it was? Because I'm trying to think.
2009.
Oh, see, things were still booming back then.
Yeah.
It was big times for yoga back then.
Absolutely. And
that's why you were getting all those classes.
Exactly. And it was, but it was very interesting because my only exposure to yoga, apart from the like vinyasa classes in Chicago, which... I don't know. They were all at odd times, so it wasn't like these big classes. Still, like
interesting. What do you mean by odd times? Like the times of day?
The times of day. Like, so it wasn't like I was going to a 6:00 vinyasa class. I was going at like noon when I had a break, or like 2:00 in the afternoon.
Right. I was always like a 10 and 12 and 2 guy 2 when it wasn't the 6:30 crowded scene.
Exactly. Yeah. So when I came to Boston, not even talking about teaching, but taking yoga, it took me a really long time to find even a class that I wanted to go to, because it was still very dominated by sort of Ashtanga and forest yoga at that point in time, and I'd never done abs in a yoga class before.
And I came some abs, you can do
and
I
came to Boston and was like,
yeah,
what's happening?
Well, there was like a power craze.
Yeah,
like
absolutely.
That was like right in the thick of that, I'm sure.
And then I found Barbara Baina, who at that time was teaching at a little tiny room on Harvard Street in Brookline, and my friend who worked in the admissions office was like, I've heard about this woman, we should go like try and find her. And we got lost the first time we went, and we like turned around and just went back. We're like, I don't know where this place is.
But you tried again.
We tried again, and we found it. And I remember leaving that class and being like, I have no idea what that was about, but I want to go to that class. Like, that's what I want to.
What was so different about it?
It was slow. It was there. It certainly was. I mean, I had exposure at that point to Iyengar yoga, so and that really appealed to me.
Was she coming from that?
She was formerly an Iyengar teacher, but not
sticking to it strict.
Hasn't been for decades now.
Mm-hmm.
But I very distinctly remember that the whole class was essentially taught via imagery, and that was something I had not necessarily encountered before. Like even the sort of where to place your, just stack your bones felt very much less put your knee over your ankle and much more like, I don't know. I can't even recall whatever imagery she was using at the time, but it was just, we were feeling things out. And that was different. I remember that being different. And I remember being slightly confused by that. But
oh, right. You have to figure it out. I have to figure it out. What do you mean?
Exactly.
So you're not telling me what to do and what to feel.
So I ended up, she's still not at that space, but at a different studio, teaches a Tuesday 2:00 class. So pretty quickly I ended up in there. Probably had no business being in there at first, but and while it was still over in that tiny little studio that was so hard to find, it was like the same 15 people every Tuesday.
Yeah.
And I would drag my friends, and then they would become regulars, and now it's like a big class now it's at a bigger studio that's easier to get to, but it's a big class. So that was at a time where wow, this is like we're getting into like the whole story.
Yeah.
So this was
that's what I want.
Yeah. This was at a time when I was sort of had, like, yoga was very helpful. It really helped me get through, break through some old habits and patterns. And then I got really excited because all of a sudden I could do all the fancy.
You could do stuff.
Like I could.
And you were a teacher.
Exactly.
And I demonstrating.
Could very easily. I was very adept at doing all of these arm balances and doing, that was something I could do. I could roll out of bed and do Bakasana. Like, I didn't need to warm up for that. That's just my body fit into that shape.
We were young and vibrant.
Yeah. And then that sort of quickly, within the course of 6 months, fell apart. And my body was like, oh, yeah, no, that's
caught up.
That's too far.
Only in 6 months. That's
I mean, it was pretty, because it was in the course of teacher training, and you get kind of very
There's a rush.
There's a rush, and that year before I moved to Boston, I was practicing a lot, like multiple times a day. I was in that phase.
crazy ass kids is what we were.
Yeah. So. This always stuck with me, and I don't even know if she remembers saying this, but at one point Barbara was like, I'm people's yoga divorce counselor. People come to me when they're like ready to break up with yoga. And then we work
patch things up.
We patch things up.
We work on it.
So that was really important. I don't know if I would have kept teaching had I not found.
So you're saying after the teacher training, things kind of fell apart in a certain way, and then this teacher helped you through
absolutely. And that was
outside of the training. That was on the 2 p.m. class.
That was in the 2 p.m. Exactly. And I think at the same time I was probably enrolled in Cindy's 500-hour training in New York.
Yeah.
So somehow I was in grad school doing Cindy's 500-hour training,
but getting nursed back to health
and
at the 2 p.m. class. What's her name
class,
again?
Barbara.
Barbara. What's her last name?
Bena.
I don't know her.
Yeah, she's cool. She actually was going to. She has her teacher training, which is her last one she's ever doing.
Oh my gosh!
She's in the last 2 months of it, so she's in that this weekend.
And why did she decide to stop doing teacher training? Do you know?
She just felt it was time.
She's like, I'm done.
She was just.
She's been teaching for a lot of years.
Yeah. She's just done.
I'm done. Wow.
So
wow. So you kick ass on your asana that proves to be a bit of a hollow pursuit, as it did for me.
Yeah.
Anybody who's read any of my stuff knows we have the same story there,
Yeah.
And then you nurse yourself back a little bit. You still love yoga after that. You don't leave.
Yes.
You don't totally blow up. I went through the same thing.
Yeah,
You
yeah.
know what I mean? Like, I hit a point where I was like, well, this isn't working. Like, consider maybe yoga's not the right thing.
Exactly.
But then you realize, I think it is. I just have to change.
Yeah, you just have to change the way that...
It has to change to fit what I need more.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And and then at some point in all of that, sort of got hired in at BackBay, and
I see. So after, were you teaching there previously, or you said you said hired back there, or you got hired at BackBay?
I got hired at BackBay. I had started pretty soon after I moved, assisting Lynn, who's the former owner, in her 4 p.m. class, and then
so the woman who owned it, you assisted her in her 4 p.m. class to start.
Yes.
I'm thinking of, like, I've got all these teacher trainees, you know what I mean? Like, how do you get the gig, right? So you started showing up to BackBay Yoga because it was close by, maybe, or something like that. You're like, oh, this is a cool center. I'd like to teach here.
Yeah.
You noticed when the owner taught.
Yes.
And you're like, oh, she teaches at 4. I can go to that class.
Exactly.
And you went to that class, and you were like an awesome student.
Yeah.
And then you were like, went up to her, and then you take it from there. So you started assisting her,
I assisted, and then I had to. I remember. I don't know if she remembers this, but I went up to her and said, I can't assist next week because I'm going to go to New York to take Judith Lassiter's training. And I remember seeing a light bulb go off in her head. And then within 4 weeks after that, she had already said, hey, in a couple months, can you take over the restorative class here? And then there was also...
So did you think about that in advance?
No, that was not...
Did you think if I drop it, if I tell her I'm doing the training, it might lead to something?
Cindy had to nagged me kicking and screaming into taking that training. That was not...
Judith's awesome, though.
Yeah, no, she was. And because I was expecting her to be this very sort of floaty,
no, she's totally down there.
And when she walked into the room, I was like, oh,
she's like yoga mom. She's totally,
she's great.
Yeah,
and so I just had a completely different expectation of what the restorative yoga
meant. Yeah.
teacher would be. So, and she's going to be here in 2 weeks. So
right.
Yeah. And
so that scored you the gig.
That scored me a gig. And then I think even before I started that class, I was walking in to take a class, and a teacher's appendix had burst, and I had to step in and teach a class. It was some random
by necessity,
event
by necessity.
And
you were around, but I wrote about this recently. It's you were around, you were taking classes.
Yep.
The owner of the center saw you there.
Yep.
You earned some trust over time because of that.
Yep.
She knew you knew how to practice well.
Yeah.
Even if she hadn't been in a class that you taught. And then she knew you were trained reasonably well, right?
Yeah.
So then she needs a teacher. It's like, yo, Ryan.
Exactly.
Hook me up.
But that whatever class I randomly had to sub the first time, I mean, it was the doors to the elevator open. Lynn was standing right there. She clearly had just gotten off the phone with this teacher and was like, Ryan.
Yes.
4 o'clock.
And you hooked her up.
You
hooked her up, and you were in from thereafter because you pulled it. You did it for the team, man. You hooked it up.
And then just sort of developed in my role there until I was teaching really only there and managing there and leading the teacher training.
How long were you teaching there before you started managing there?
I was doing some management stuff pretty much right away.
Just because you were a helpful guy who liked to contribute?
And I had worked at the studio that I had done training at in Cleveland before, so I knew Mind Body. I knew how all of this worked. And then...
So you just made that place your home?
Yeah. And at one point, we opened up an addition on another floor in the building, which we no longer have anymore. But when that came in, then there was really a need for a full-time
So they got another floor to add more practice space or something?
Exactly. And so then...
They tried to expand.
And then... and that worked really great for a while until it didn't. And then...
And so wait, I want to hear about
Okay.
it. So the center's doing awesome when you come in. The classes are starting to sell out.
Mm-hmm.
So the owner says, hey, the space upstairs coming available.
Yep.
Let's get this space and expand. So you have more classes, more spaces, more teachers.
Yep.
And then does classes just start to not do good, or how long does
I
it?
think it was more the logistical, it's one thing to have 3 rooms. 3 rooms for a studio in one location is very difficult.
2 rooms.
2 rooms is very difficult.
I only have 1. I don't want to.
So 2 rooms is very difficult. 3 rooms is extremely difficult, but then you add the logistics of there being
Just
a 4th floor. So like we're on the 2nd floor, and so the addition is on the 4th floor.
Okay.
So just the
oh yeah,
people flow of things
was not
the
so
logistics
smooth.
just became sort of,
and was
got
it
to
issue just like too many classes, too many teachers, like too many subs, like
it just
you can't get them filled, and
it just became really tough. And then it got to the point where we were hosting these huge events because we had to, not because we
I see
wanted to.
Yeah, you had the space, you need to use it.
And when you have 3, Boston's a busy city, but it's not like New York. The midday classes are not going to be, with the exception of the lunch hour, they're not going to be packed.
2 or 3 maybe. Yeah. That's not different. In Brooklyn's the same.
Yeah. But I remember going to Ohm, and like the 10 o'clock would be the busiest class a day. Or
Sometimes.
Like the 4,
again, if you live in a certain place where there's like a lot of artists who don't have 9 to 5s, then sometimes those 10 a.m.s can...
Yeah.
And Ohm was just a really popular center.
Exactly.
You know?
Exactly. So, and to be honest, the studio is still doing really well. It was just...
Well, wait a second, because you said that the woman who was the owner, you said she was the owner. So at some point, she sold, or is she the one who's...
She was the one... No, she's
the owner up until now.
Up until now.
I see.
And she was the one who saw the sale through.
I see. And wait, I don't want to get there yet. I don't think we're there yet. So what else? So you have been teaching there and you started managing there, you said 6 years ago.
Yeah.
And how's that been? Because you're a yoga teacher and you manage, and I do both things.
Yeah,
maybe I say something because I own a center and I don't have a front desk staff.
Yeah,
the teachers all sign in their own classes, and I manage. I take care of all the subs. I don't have the teachers do it themselves, where like the teachers have to call down the list. It's always a nightmare, like them having to scramble to get there. So I don't do that. Like there has to be one pivot person.
Yeah.
So it all comes through me. It's on me, which is more work. I take it on, but things run smooth because of that. Because there's like one person, you know. Totally. So I just to say that, so like I totally get it.
Yeah.
I understand what it is to be a yoga teacher and manage a center, and sometimes those things don't. You know what I mean? To make them work together. When it's my show, it's a little bit easier. When it's someone else's show, I imagine there's other layers.
Yeah. It was great. And I, still love doing it. And the thing is I'm also really good at that. But it's one of those things that I'm really good at, but is not necessarily the healthiest thing for me to be doing. Yeah. Just because that type of stuff can become kind of all-consuming for me to my own detriment.
To the expense of other places you might be putting your energies that would be better for you.
Exactly. So, I think, like with 6 years for to be doing a job like that, that's a long time when it's not your own. You're still teaching classes as well as managing, or mostly just managing? So I was teaching classes, 4 or 5 classes a week, managing, and then also leading and administrating the teacher trainings.
Oh, so you were conducting the teacher training courses?
Yeah, so the owner, myself, and then we'd rotate in a third to sort of co-lead the teacher trainings.
And how many teacher trainings a year were you doing?
We had been doing 3.
Mm-hmm.
This year we cut back to 2.
Yeah.
Because we were just...
Yeah, I do too, but...
Yeah, it's a lot.
Depending on how you run them,
Yeah. So it was kind of like it was everything. That was all I was doing at all times.
And do you... you've paid your way. You've made a living at it.
Absolutely. And made a really
and you feel
great
good,
living.
like you were treated well.
Yeah.
Because that's just a lot of input.
Absolutely.
Into a center.
Absolutely.
That you don't own.
And it was a great living. She was very, very generous
Cool.
with all of us. Still is very generous with all of us. But I mean, I guess the thing that gets to be exhausting is too strong of a word.
No, okay, if not exhausting, then difficult at times.
Difficult at times is the sort of switching of hats. Like,
now I'm a manager, now I'm a teacher.
Now you're a manager and you're, running reports or, dealing with
numbers,
the books or like spreadsheets and all of this.
Mm-hmm.
And then, okay, it's 5:50. I got to pivot, walk into the class, teach.
Yeah.
And then go home. And for whatever reason, that was something I was never great at. Being able
going
to...
home?
No, not going home. Going home, I was like, okay, I'm going home now. But getting through, 5-6 hours of being at the desk and then having to somehow switch over.
Yeah.
That is never easy for me. And one thing that I had to let go of a lot because of managing was teaching privates, which is something I really love doing, is working with people one-on-one.
Mm-hmm.
But that switch was something I just found that
it's hard.
Could not do. I couldn't put that much focus on somebody and then go turn and, operate mind body for 4 hours and then turn it and then go into a class. Like that, days like that were just awful. I would just be so tired at the end of the day. Tired in a good way. Tired.
No, I really appreciate that. I mean, I know the same thing's true. So much of what I do is like on the internet,
Yeah.
One way or the other. I'm working on the computer and I work at home. When I'm not at the center, my apartment's right around the corner from the center. But it's kind of an issue, like with my wife sometimes too, or like, you're working at the computer for those hours and then I have to go teach a class. I need like a little bit of time.
Yeah.
Like I need like a half hour to just sit and not be at the computer and just kind of get my head in a place, do a little breathing or whatever it is I'm going to do to then be in a place where I feel like I could be effective as a teacher. And so if my wife tries to hand me a baby, you know what I mean? Or like she needs me to help her in that half hour, that one little half hour that I got, like I'm kind of screwed. And I think sometimes I can go into a class like not in the right place and I can use the teaching to bring myself along with the class there. Like sometimes there's no other choice.
Exactly.
But that's not ideal and I don't like it. Like I take my job real serious. So to not be where you need to be to do what you feel like you need to do as a teacher feels crappy. I totally get that.
Yeah.
You got to prioritize what you're going to do.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But I also felt like there was a part of that whole dynamic that was me feeling like, well, I couldn't possibly do this for a living. Like I couldn't, so I've got to manage the studio. So there was this. So like,
taking on the manager position had to do with insecurity about whether or not you really could make a living as a yoga teacher.
And I think at first it was not that. But there was a bit of a. I
still want a real job too.
there was a bit of that, and also I really do still enjoy managing the studio. I mean that's a great great gig and very engaging.
Do you have? I want to hear like managerial stories about your like your work. Like are there times when like you have like bad situations with teachers or like
Oh yeah,
I want to hear. I want to because like I have a close. I get to make all the decisions about who's teaching at the center. They all have come through the training at this point, so I all know them. I all have relationships to them, and I don't have that kind of drama that I know happens at like a lot of other centers. And you know, I'm pretty good in terms of like making those decisions about not putting people in slots that then leave me high and dry and things like that. You know, but at the same time, I know there's a lot of drama at other places, and you've got a look on your face while I'm asking you about it. So I'm curious, like, because you keep saying, "Oh, it's such a great gig, it's such a great gig," and I know there's like probably a reality TV show.
Well, yeah, there could always be a reality TV show about
They've tried to make a couple, but they haven't really happened yet.
Yeah.
Like I've had like a couple emails from like casting directors who are like, "Do you guys have lots of crazy drama at your yoga center? We'd love to come in and make it." And I'm like, delete.
That's amazing that you actually got emails from people.
Oh yeah, no, I have. It hasn't come into any fruition, but I'm sure someone will do it eventually.
I didn't really handle much of the kind of teacher stuff.
I see. That wasn't your role.
That wasn't. My role had always been kind of like fixing the sound system when it broke, and fixing the computer when it breaks, and then booking. I mean, part of the reason I got a more full-time management position was because we had all this extra space and we needed to up the number of events we were doing. So they needed someone full-time to just manage the schedule of the rooms and booking events.
I see.
So that was mostly
So you didn't have to deal with who's subbing the classes.
No.
Who dealt with that? The owner?
It varied. I mean, the owner had tried to sort of pass that off a number of times to varying degrees of success.
It's always the issue, right? And it's crazy. At your center, do the teachers have to find their own subs, or
at one location they do. At the main location in BackBay, there's somebody. They like put it into a form on our website, and then
other people,
and then the manager.
The new manager, not you,
not me,
will decide.
Puts them in the right
place.
Yeah.
But previously, what happened? Like first come, first serve, or
no?
The owner was making the
choices.
Was making the choices.
Just made the choices based on who, because she knew everyone's schedules in the back of her head, so she knew exactly.
That's what I meant. I'm the pivot point. I know people like what their jobs are and like kind of what their availability is. Yeah. So if you have someone like that, it can all run pretty smooth. But if it's hit or miss and the teachers are all on their own, then it just goes haywire. That's why.
Yeah.
I think
and we
crazy.
have. I mean, the past like maybe 2 years, the teaching staff that has settled. Sort of very like solid and steady group of people, and of course, there are moments of drama, and
And what are the kind of stock scenarios where the dramas happen? Like someone does something in their class that the owner's unhappy with. No. Someone shows up late. Someone doesn't show up.
You certainly get the not showing up, and I've had to pinch hit for that a couple of times.
Like, no show, no call is like the cardinal sin.
Yeah,
you gotta. That's your main job.
But mostly it's just sort of the interpersonal politics of having 20 teachers between two studios, all sort of
vying for popularity. Is it a popularity contest?
I don't actually think they're all so different.
Yeah.
I mean, that's one of the nice things about how BackBay has always been run is it's not like Lynn trained everybody at the studio. Everyone's coming from a very...
If you are hearing this message, then you're listening to the free version of J. Brown Yoga Talks. To hear the rest of our conversation, please subscribe to Podcast Premium at jbrownyoga.com/premium.